we have some very serious questions. Mark Carney promised he would spend less. His deficit is almost 100% more than the one that Trudeau left behind. He promised that we would have the fastest growing economy in the G7. We have the fastest shrinking economy in the G7.
Welcome back. The federal government is set to unveil its budget early next month, and Prime Minister Mark Carney has promised major investments, but also to slash the operating budget to balance in 3 years. That could put thousands of public service jobs on the chopping block. The interim parliamentary budget officer, meanwhile, said on this program that Canada's fiscal outlook is, quote, at the precipice, and one of the Liberals' potential dance partners, the Bloc Québécois, has already said it's unlikely they're going to support the budget.
I will see what's in it before I support it or not. But, as I said, I don't see how. I cannot see how we could support a budget which is first based on some taxes reductions, electoral gifts, and some fantasies in many regards. I cannot support that.
So, what might operational spending cuts look like? Can the Prime Minister square the circle of significant spending while balancing the government's operational books? With me now to discuss just that is the former clerk of the Privy Council, Michael Wernick, and former parliamentary budget officer, Yves Giroux. Mr. Wernick, Mr. Giroux, it's a pleasure to see you both. Thank you very much for making the time.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Mr. Wernick, I'm going to start with you, and I know that you've written extensively about the ways in which changes to the public service could occur, but I wanted to start off and ask, in principle, if you agree with the idea that there does have to be cuts to operational spending on the government side.
Well, I think it's the government's choice what fiscal track they want to put out there. They have a mandate that includes fiscal restraint, but it goes with a commitment to government transformation. They want a smaller government to also be more effective. So my focus, is more on where are we going to land in 2 or 3 years. We want a smaller public service, that's fine, but I think we also want to pay attention to its long-term capabilities.
And I want to ask you about the details of how that can be navigated in a moment. I just want to bring Mr. Giroux in and ask you, I guess from the perspective of someone who has analyzed the growth of the public service, we kind of talk about it in a very political sense, but in a more numbers-based way, how much has the public service grown, let's say, from pre-COVID to post-COVID to now?
Well, it's grown from about 340,000 full-time equivalents in 2014-15 to close to 440,000 full-time equivalents as of I think it's last year, March 2024. That's the latest numbers I have. So it's grown by over 100,000 full-time equivalents in a span of 10 years, which is very impressive. And that suggests that there is potential for reducing the size of the public service. But it will all depend on how it's done and where it is done in order to minimize the impact on service to Canadians. And that will be a very fine balance to find.
Well, that's exactly where I want to take the conversation, how to strike that balance or how to navigate that path. Mr. Wernick, the political discussion so far has talked about, will it be cuts, will it be attrition, a cap, all that kind of thing. You have written that attrition is the worst way to go about it. Why do you think that is the case?
Well, attrition is just relying on a passive pattern of who dies, who gets sick, who takes retirement. It's not going to end up with a public service in the right people in the right places. I would work backwards from what kinds of services and functions you want to offer Canadians, and then you make sure the people are in the right place. If you want to reduce the overall personnel, complement at the same time, that's fine. But you can't just wait for people to leave. I think you have to mindfully, proactively put people where you want them to be. There are parts of government they want to bulk up, parts they're willing to cut. That requires a much more proactive strategy. And I would, rather than rely on waiting for people to leave, I would do what we've done in the past and the private sector often does, which is incentives for people to leave early and prepay some of that attrition.
So I have heard that that is on the table, something that's being discussed. If I could follow up with you, Mr. Wernick. What about the idea that that could have some of your more experienced people head out the door at a time when you are facing this crisis and might need that? Like, is that Are there other ways to go about reducing numbers that wouldn't see a commensurate loss in experience?
Well, what they're doing now is they're cutting off the supply of new talent. It's the younger, right. The people that have arrived in the last few years are not being renewed. The students I work with are not being hired, so there'll be a loss at the younger end of the public service, and it's a difficult trade-off. You obviously want some of your experienced workers, but if we're in this situation where you really want to dramatically downsize, I would take measures to preserve as many of the jobs as possible of the young, diverse, digital part of the public service, because they're the ones we're going to need for facing the future.
Mr. Giroux, just jumping off some of that, and in particular, like around the idea of attrition, the government has been explicit about the scale, at least in their campaign, during the campaign, of what they would like to see reduced, right? Eliminate essentially over a 3-year period $15 billion of what they have classified as excess spending, on the operations of government. Can that be accomplished through solely attrition or some idea of a cap, though they haven't even defined really what they mean by a cap? Is that on salaries? Is that on people? That kind of thing. Like, what is realistic?
Well, I don't think that can be achieved through attrition. Just based on the numbers, and even if it could be done through attrition, I don't think, as Mr. Wernick said, it's desirable, because people will retire and will leave the public service in sectors where you don't want to see reductions. For example, our CMP officers will leave the force, and you probably want them to be replaced. Same with border service. The CBSA, you want border officers to be on a full contingent. Food Inspection Agency, the Coast Guard. So there's a number of examples where you want those departing to be replaced to maintain a good level of service to Canadians, maintain the safety and security of Canadians. So even if it was mathematically possible to reduce the size of the public service solely through attrition, it's not desirable, because that leaves gaps where you don't want gaps, and that leaves parts that may be ripe for reductions relatively untouched or not reduced as much as there should be. So that's why it's very easy from a management perspective to rely on attrition, but it's probably the least efficient way of reducing the size of the public service in the short term, but also in the medium and in the long term. I remember joining the public service in 1995, a year where there were deep cuts, and these effects, the effects of these cuts, as well as the reduction in the intake of new public servants, was reduced, and that left impacts for years and years where there was a big gap in talent rising through the ranks because of the impacts of these cuts and the hiring freeze. So if the government wants to do it that way, it's certainly not the best and the most efficient way of doing it. Instead, as Mr. Wernick said, they should identify areas where they need to prioritize employment and an active public service, and reduce other areas that are deemed less or lower priorities.
What are the stakes, Mr. Wernick, of not getting the balance right? I think there's this, again, like political discussion going on about a bloated bureaucracy and, things getting out of hand after COVID and things like that. And again, that's very political. But like for people who are at home who rely on many government services, like what are the stakes of getting it wrong?
Well, you're going to have to make choices. Every single one of those employees, and 60% of them are spread across the country and not here in Ottawa, they're attached to a program, a service, a function, a profession, a location. So I think governments can't duck their responsibility to make those choices. I think the other factor that people will notice is, unlike 1995 or 2012, the other big downsizings that Eve and I went through, this one's taking place with the backdrop of AI. And AI is changing professions and occupations right across the economy, and certainly within the public service. So I think you also have to layer in technology and equipping people, with AI tools to do their jobs. And I've also called for a doubling of investment in training. If you shed 20% of the workforce, let's increase the training and the technology and the tools to the 80% that stay.
Mr. Giroux, final question to you, and it's about the budget in particular, just because this entire discussion is framed against that backdrop. We're a month less a day away from the budget dropping. Do you agree with the person who's replaced you that we're on the precipice of some kind of fiscal cliff?
Well, I would probably personally wait until we see what's in the budget before making such a statement. I think, for my part, it's a bit premature, but my successor, said what he said, so he probably maybe has different information. But from what I see and from the information that I've been exposed to, I would rather wait until the budget is stable to see exactly what the fiscal track looks like for the foreseeable future, what types of measures the government wants to implement on the spending, but also on the revenue side that may or may not plug the fiscal gap that we're expecting to see. So we'll have a much better idea of that on the evening of November 4.
Fair point. I hope I can lean on both your expertise following the introduction of the budget. I appreciate you making the time for the conversation today. Thank you.
A pleasure.
Thanks for your interest.
Thanks so much, Mr. Wernick and Mr. Giroux. When we come back today, tensions between Russia and the West are spiking. European leaders are warning that Moscow is stepping up hybrid warfare activities on the continent, while Vladimir Putin is dismissing those claims as, quote, hysterical. I'm going to speak with the Prime Minister of Estonia, Kristen Michal, after a short break about just that.